I currently have 7 empty notebooks, and I have no clue what to put in them. Suggestions?
Well, have you tried putting spaghetti in it?
I'm currently taking suggestions from literally anyone but you.
Put spaghetti in it, Captain Rogers.
I'm currently taking suggestions from anyone but you two.
Spaghetti.
I'm no longer taking suggestions.
So here's the thing. I'm going to throw out any pretense of what the consensus on this game is, and I'm going to come right out and say it. I like this game. If you disagree, cool. Stick around though, because despite me liking this game, I think my criticism of it is going to be pretty even-handed. Today, we'll be discussing the story, characters, gameplay, economy, and future of Marvel's Avengers, as well as discussing what pulls me back into this game time and again. Some of this might be a rehash of talking points from a video I made many moons ago covering the game's beta, but it's likely none of you watched that video, and I barely remember what I said in it, so it's fine. So without further ado, let's get into it.
Sorry it took me so long to bail you out of jail.
No, it's my fault. I shouldn't have used my one phone call to prank call the police.
The story of Marvel's Avengers is actually kind of interesting. Like, okay, it's not the best or even the most original Avengers story ever told. The general setup feels a lot like that of Avengers Endgame, what with the 5-year time jump, loss of one or more key members of the Avengers, forcing them to disband, and a wide-eyed Avengers stan hatching a crazy scheme to get the Avengers back together and save the day. Beyond that, I really like how the story relies on a genuine sense of mystery. Even things that you know, like the fact that Captain America isn't dead or the fact that AIM is up to no good, are played for straight suspense, and it works. And while this is more of a gameplay thing, I like how they incorporated set pieces into key moments in the plot, like Kamala running from the Hulk, Black Widow doing some sneaky stealthing, or Iron Man flying into space while aptly listening to Iron Maiden's Flight of Icarus. The game has a good focus on how to make these set pieces function, both on a narrative and gameplay level. The DLC also has a pretty solid story arc. The 2 Hawkeye story packs are really good, continuing the mystery of AIM's plan while also making you wonder what the hell's happening with Clint, and then expanding the scope of the game's universe by taking you into the apocalyptic future. War for Wakanda is genuinely great as just a Black Panther story, wholly disconnected from the events of the rest of the game. It takes the time to make T'Challa a genuine protagonist for that section of the campaign, and develops the world of Wakanda as reasonably as can be expected for an expansion within a larger game. There's some additional plot stuff within boss battles, the claw raid that I can't play, and some lore you get from text files. While I don't love lore dumps through text, I do actually enjoy reading this game's lore. By far my favorite is the transcription of Tony leaving a voicemail to T'Challa after A-Day asking him to just buy out AIM. Spider-Man, Mighty Thor, and Winter Soldier also have some text stuff with the occasional stunted cutscene. Some bosses continue the plot. Look, honestly, I'm struggling to find things to say about this story, mostly because it's very simple yet effective. And because doing a beat-by-beat plot breakdown feels almost disingenuous, because the characters mostly carry the story.
Are you an R pirate or a yo-ho-ho pirate?
I'm not paying $600 for Photoshop pirate.
I think the characters in this game are mostly written fine. I think the biggest problem is that the circumstances that this game set up don't affect the Avengers in the long term. A-Day could have been this big push for off-screen development, but it isn't, which is really weird. Mostly because the narrative purpose for the A-Day prologue, at least on a character level, is introducing us to the Avengers before they suffer a great loss. Logically, this is meant to be a before and after. We see how everyone was before, and then the rest of the game can show them with their newly roughened edges. But no, because almost all the interesting characterization is undone by the end of the campaign. Tony goes broke and becomes a bit more brooding, but he's back to seemingly infinite resources and being a quippy asshole in no time. Bruce is combative because he blames himself for Cap's death, but he's well off enough with everybody by the end of the campaign. Hulk just has his trust issues a little worsened. Natasha doesn't change, Steve doesn't change, Kamala doesn't change. We have no sense of what Clint, Kate, and T'Challa were like before the story begins, so we can't measure the change incurred by the disbanding of the Avengers. Peter wasn't even Spider-Man until after A-Day. Jane is from another universe. Bucky has an arc of trying to be better and forgive himself for what he did as the Winter Soldier, but unlike the movies, we don't really have a specific sense of what his past as the Winter Soldier looked like, so it's just kinda hollow. The only thing that really roots it is his romantic relationship with Natasha, which is also really loosely defined. The only character who gets genuine development and sticks to it as a result of this massive loss is Thor, who starts out very arrogant but becomes more stoic and humble as a result of 5 years without the hammer and heroics. Seriously, there is an easily identifiable change from the start of the campaign to the end of it for Thor. Sure, his quips in battle imply a little bit more arrogance and cockiness, but can you blame him now that the Avengers are back on their feet? And I know I've been shitting on the Avengers' lack of development, but they're still mostly pretty well characterized. Tony is still your basic Robert Downey Jr. copycat. Bruce is brooding and conflicted, more so than his movie counterpart, which I really like. Captain America is the paragon of virtue you expect him to be, almost to a ridiculous level. Like, the whole campaign is about getting Cap back, and once he's back, the atmosphere and attitude of almost everyone involved pulls a complete 180 from sheer and utter despair to unabashed hope and optimism. Speaking of hope and optimism, Kamala is written pretty well here. I actually kind of like that she maintains her belief in the Avengers through all the controversy, and that at the end of the day, it's the belief of a teenager that things can get better that saves the world. And y'all know that I love a good teen superhero saving the world with the power of faith. Black Widow's confident, stealthy, and manages to feel like the smartest person in the room, even when the other people in the room are Bruce, Tony, and T'Challa. Kate and Clint are written pretty perfectly, honestly. I actually like these versions of the characters more than the cinematic versions, which is not me dunking on Haley Steinfeld's version of Kate, we stan. I just prefer the game one as an adaptation of Kate Bishop more, whereas I think the show's version is a little bit better of a character. T'Challa in this game is, without question, a stone cold yo double G. Peter's fine, I guess. I think the biggest problem is the Tom Hollanding of Peter Parker, making him more timid and pitchy when this Peter is supposed to be at least 4 years into his career and a college student. I do like that this Peter isn't an Avengers stan though, and respects them while still preferring to operate on his own. Jane's okay, I guess. She's kinda got the least characterization, but I like what they do with her in this game exponentially more than the movies. I think it's mostly that she's very confident and fierce, and her dialogue contains direct references to the books. I also love that they kept the little detail that Jane speaks with a very Shakespearean flair when she's Thor. It's a nice touch, and lines like, "Today my hammer comes for your face," and "Now I kick thine hindquarters," are just always funny. I think Bucky's pretty decently done. He's torn up about his past as the Winter Soldier, and though we don't see much of it, his dialogue carries a great weight with it. And Bucky being a simp for Natasha is by far one of my favorite character dynamics in the game. But unfortunately, like Jane, we don't see much of this character, so it's not like we can get a full picture of how his characterization plays into the team dynamics. The game's side characters like Nick Fury, Maria Hill, Hank Pym, Shuri, and Jarvis are all fine. The voice acting, though, is complicated. Travis Willingham is a pretty standard Thor voice nowadays, so of course he's great. What's not standard is having a Hulk who isn't voiced by Fred Tatasciore. Here he's voiced by Darren DePaul, who might best be known as Reinhardt in Overwatch. I think his Hulk is a little too deep and growly for my taste, but it's serviceable. I actually think he's better served as Maestro in the game. Jeff Shine is a pretty left-field pick for Captain America, but I really dig it. I think most of the negative reception to his voice is that he's not trying to sound too much like Chris Evans, but he reminds me more of how Brian Bloom plays the character, and I can't complain about that. Speaking of left field picks, Giacomo Gianniotti plays Clint pretty well. Alright, enough beating around the bush. Yes, Nolan North is Tony Stark, Troy Baker is Bruce Banner, Ashley Birch is Kate Bishop, and Laura Bailey as Natasha Romanoff are some of the most basic castings possible. It's like they tried to run through a list of every big-name voice actor and snag as many as they could. They even got Steve Bloom to voice Claw. All they're missing is Frank Welker, Tara Strong, and Fred Wait. Fred Tatasciore is actually in this game as Crossbones? What the fuck, man? Anyways, yes, they're obvious and basic picks, but they're still good. Like, they're fucking good. My brain just does not recognize Nolan North as a physical entity anymore. It just registers his characters as their own individual, unique people. Christopher Judge is a godly T'Challa, and I really appreciate this game bringing in Beth McGuire, the dialect coach from the actual Black Panther movie, to keep a consistent Wakandan accent. With very limited material, I think Zira Fazal, hope I'm pronouncing that right, does a great job with Jane Foster, and as of the time that I'm writing this, she's not listed on the game's IMDb. So if anyone watching this video can change that, get on it, do it for me please. Scott Porter does a pretty good job as the Winter Soldier, which makes sense since he's played the character before. I think he brings a pretty good dramatic weight to a lot of his lines. It's just wild to me that he's also played Nightwing, The Flash, Aquaman, Star-Lord, Cyclops, Scarlet Spider, Harry Osborn, and Damian Wayne in other projects. The dude has found his niche. He's also not currently listed on the IMDb, so, you know. Obviously, we gotta talk about Sean Chiplock, this game's Spider-Man. I think he does well with what he's given, but you can tell there's a directive for him to pitch his voice up higher to sound younger, and I think it kind of damages the performance. "Oh, but Steve," cries the viewer, "how do you know he's not doing it as a creative decision?" Well, one, because I know Marvel. They'll definitely want their biggest IP in one piece of media matching it as closely as possible in the other piece of media, i.e., they just want him to sound more like Tom Holland. And two, because he's played Spider-Man before and he didn't fucking sound like that.
Wow, look at him go.
Why didn't you stop him?
What? Against a criminal? That sounds dangerous.
You lifted a 300-pound man with one hand.
I don't see how that's relevant.
Sandra Saad carries the game as Kamala Khan, just, no notes. She absolutely delivers on the sense of wonder and optimism that this character requires, and I love her performance with all my heart. Other standouts from the cast that I want to mention before we move on. Harry Hayden Patton does a really good job as Jarvis. I really like the energy that Danny Jacob brings to Hank Pym. Usman Ally and Jolene Anderson bring really solid performances as the game's primary villains, MODOK and Monica Rappaccini respectively. Honestly, this whole cast is really solid, and I can't wait to see who gets brought in the future.
I think I'm having a midlife crisis.
Are you not 20?
I could die at 40, you don't know.
Okay, this is probably the bit that everyone's been waiting on. I'm going to try and talk more generally about mission design and the overall systems in this segment, and then the next segment is going to be how each individual character plays. The mission design in this game is lackluster. I'm going to stick with the word lackluster because I'm trying to be nice. Almost every mission ends with standing or punching. You have to stand on a point and punch enemies so they can't get you off the point. You have to punch things while a teammate holds them open for you. Sometimes your only objective is just to kill the fuck out of things. The vaults are just standing in specific spots in a specific order, and then standing somewhere else a few times in a row, and if someone tries to shut it down, guess what? You punch them. Now, the campaign does feature sections with some slightly more involved gameplay at times, such as some light puzzle solving. It's not Uncharted level, but it's at least not just punching things. And the boss battles suffer a lot here too. The first Abomination fight, MODOK and Claw all kind of have a specific strategy to them, but it really just amounts to punching things in a specific order. Hell, as stupid as I think their inclusion is, I think Warship and Warbot are actually missed opportunities. It's these massive fights against these incredibly large-scale war machines, and it amounts to just more punching. Hell, if handled well, these could be on some Shadow of the Colossus shit. But no, life can't be good. I actually think a really positive example is Claw's mining tools, because, at least you have to ascend a thing and punch things. Yeah, you're just punching things in a specific order, but, there's a reason for it, and there's, a flow. Imagine if Warship and Warbot were like that, and not just punch this thing, now punch it in the eye, now punch these vents, now try and break the shield so that you can punch these vents. It's really repetitive. And it would certainly help if the combat had a consistently good feel to it. Look at games like Fortnite. All it is a repetitive cycle of shooting and running and building, but you work with it because the gameplay loop feels good, the guns feel good, and the combat feels good overall. In Avengers, the combat feels like it can't decide between feeling incredibly floaty or too weighty. Most of the characters' basic attacks feel way too floaty, but almost all the heroic attacks and some of the heavies feel too weighty. I'd say the only attacks in the game that feel right 100% of the time are some of the ranged attacks. Cap's shield is kind of a dud, but throwing Thor's hammer is a sexual revelation every time. The only other ranged attack that I really don't like is Hulk's debris throw, but everything else is serviceable at worst.
Thor, I only ever see you awake. Do you ever shut down or stop running?
Oh, I'm always running, though I know not from what.
Before I get ahead of myself, I want to break down every character individually, because as much as the characters feel the same, they're actually quite different. It kind of reminds me of Infamous Second Son, where a major complaint is that all the powers feel the same, and no. They have the same controls so that you don't get confused too much, and they can all solve the same problems, but the way they actually solve those problems does feel quite different power to power. It's a similar issue with Avengers, with my only real gripe being that the different Avengers shouldn't be able to solve the same problems as easily as one another. Another pertinent comparison, I think, is Overwatch. Like, yeah, in Overwatch, Lucio or Sombra could single-handedly kill Roadhog with enough practice and the right conditions, but Wrecking Ball and Orisa are gonna have a much easier time. For Avengers, I think Black Widow and Hawkeye should have a harder time taking down a mech than the Hulk. Not only does this mean you have to consider team composition, but you also have to consider which enemies you're actually gonna target when playing a certain character. You know, the way the Avengers should actually operate. But enough talking about how they could have improved it. I'm gonna talk about the characters now. I do want to mention the whole Echo character debacle. While fans of the game keep pushing for wholly original characters with wildly different powers, the dev team seems obsessed with bringing us clones of pre-existing characters, currently including both Thors and both Hawkeyes. The Winter Soldier was originally built up to be kind of a mishmash between Black Widow and Captain America, and data mining from around a year ago suggested that She-Hulk and War Machine are planned for the near future. I have two theories as to why this is. The first has to do with a feature that wasn't originally planned to be in the game. See, when the game launched, you could only have one of each character on your team. One Thor, one Hawkeye, etc. But then the temporal anomaly event happened, which allowed you to have multiple of the same character on the team, and once people got a taste of it, everyone demanded it be the standard, so they made it so. So my theory here is that these Echo characters were designed for that specific purpose. Someone on your team just picked Thor already? Well, you can fall back on Mighty Thor. If you can't play Iron Man, just hop on over to War Machine. My other theory is that now that the game underperformed and the company that makes it got sold off, which we will get to, they're focusing more of their energy onto these carbon copy characters because it's all they can manage. I imagine this game has the budget of a bottle of Sunkist and a Dream right now, so I don't blame them if that's the case. I personally don't mind the Echo characters so long as they're designed well. Okay, I'm done talking about the Echoes. I'm going to talk about the actual characters that are in the game now, and I'm limiting myself to 100 words per character because, like, that alone is going to bring this section up to 1,000 words, and that makes me fearful for how long this video will be. I'm also going to end each section by rating the Avengers, considering how much you feel like that character when you're playing as them, and how they function in the game overall.
Remember, with great power comes a great need to take a nap. Wake me up in an hour.
Ranged weapons are the name of the game. Melee combat serves to charge range, which makes Iron Man's mobility key. Augmenting the lasers is essential unless you have an exotic with a 2-for-1. His parry is pretty useless, as is the projectile shield. Unibeam types are all fun to utilize, the bubble is also great with the right upgrades and tweaks. The Hulkbuster is the undisputed highlight, and you should always offer it to your teammates. If you don't, that's just selfish. 9 out of 10.
Schrodinger's cat is overrated. If you want to see something that's both dead and alive, you can talk to me any time of the day.
Cap feels like the biggest letdown in a lot of ways. The sound design of the shield makes it feel more like a trash can lid. The floatiness of his attacks is some of the most egregious. His support heroics feel useless. His assault feels really inconsistent in how long it stays out hitting enemies. And his ultimate feels too clunky and slow to look cool or be any fun. And you never even get to use his wall running. They gotta patch the Iron Man laser/unibeam bouncing. 7 out of 10.
Behold the field in which I grow my fox. Lay thine eyes upon it, and thou shalt see that it is barren.
Thor is always a good time to play. His attacks surely feel floaty, but as I said before, the hammer toss is always a godsend of power and force, pun intended. All of his heroics are divine, pun intended. His support being able to revive nearby allies is especially good during boss battles, particularly Abomination. The lightning strike feels great, and I love the little tornadoes. The Bifrost takes a bit to get used to, but once you get the timing down for max damage, it's perfect. His flight also somehow feels better than Iron Man's, despite being identical. Probably the best launch character. 9 out of 10.
Hulk stopped murder today.
Really? How'd you do that?
Self-control.
Hulk is just terrible, I'm sorry. For being the strongest one there is, his attacks always feel the weakest and floatiest. None of my builds ever feel like they have good damage, and his heroics are also pretty weak. And due to the amount of ground shake they cause and effects being thrown around, he tends to absolutely brick my game. Using people as nunchucks is pretty fun though. 4 out of 10, and he got the 4th point because his cosmetics are pretty cool.
When someone points at your black clothes and asks whose funeral it is, having a good look around the room and saying, I haven't decided yet. is typically a good response.
Black Widow feels, in many ways, appropriately lackluster. Kinda weird that it feels like she hits harder than Hulk, but whatever. Her guns have a nice variety, but only the submachine gun feels useful consistently. As with almost everyone in the game, her counter feels pretty useless, except to do the spinning head scissor thing because it's cool. Her grapple is actually pretty good for sustaining aerial combat. Overall, the character feels bland, but not god-awful. 5 out of 10.
You know how I roll. And I'm not talking about that time I fell into a pile of poo at the bottom of a hill.
Honestly, Kamala's another one who ultimately feels pretty bland, and it's because she's outdone at every turn. Her ranged is clunky, but it's only slightly better than Hulk's. Her healing aura is good, but not as good as Clint's. Her smack attack is good, but not as effective as T'Challa's spear. Her embiggen is cool, but not as cool as Hulkbuster. Her real assets are the fact that she's good for clearing crowds, and her powers are, stretchy and not stupid Green Lantern constructs. And they actually look really good, kind of proving that Kamala's traditional powers can work in live action. 6 out of 10, though.
Person of interest is almost too flattering. Like, if the police were to pound on my door and go, "A man has been murdered in your building and you are a person of interest," I'd be like, "Moi? Oh, do go on."
Kate feels like the definition of an Echo character done right. She obviously has the same abilities as Hawkeye on paper, but they put much less emphasis on trick arrows for her. Her focus goes into her stolen teleportation tech, which easily makes her combat look the most cinematic. Her heroics are pretty cool, especially her portal or black hole arrow. I always switch it depending on the mission size. Her ultimate nearly turns her into Psylocke, so that's cool. Honestly, she's a good character for how she resembles Hawkeye's characteristics as much as for how she doesn't, and vice versa. 9 out of 10.
Well, well, well. If it isn't my old friend. The dawning realization that I fucked up bad.
Kinda ironic that Hawkeye is the best Avenger in the game. His sword combat feels amazing, as does the use of the bow. Sure, it's identical to Kate in some ways, but that's neither here nor there. The fact that you can create a fire tornado is astounding, as is his automatic targeting arrow. His healing field is immeasurably useful in boss fights, and the sheer variety of trick arrows, from implosive to explosive to grapple to boomerang, makes Clint a jack of all trades. Gotta respect the boomerang. 10 out of 10.
What doesn't kill me should run, because now I'm friggin' pissed.
Black Panther, to me, feels the most like you are the character you're playing as. Specifically, Panther's animations feel like 3D renditions of the fighting style T'Challa has in Earth's Mightiest Heroes, down to the badass vibranium daggers. I also love the use of Kimoyo beads as either healing or stunning drones, whipping out a spear and summoning Bast and even some Dora Milaje. Plus, his hits feel appropriately strong, and his aerial combat feels the most complete for any non-flying or grappling character. He's gonna match Hawkeye here. 10 out of 10.
Okay. Stop asking me if I'm straight, gay, bi, whatever. I identify as a fucking threat.
It's kind of hard to judge the mighty Thor. On her own, she functions almost exactly the same as Thor, with only her main light attacks and her ult being different. I really like her ultimate using Underjarn while Mjolnir flies around like Hawkeye's ultimate, just targeting enemies on its own. Her range attack is also slightly modified. Like most of her modifications, they're ultimately negligible. In a vacuum, she's an 8 out of 10, but considering she's just an echo of Odin's Son with a few alterations, 6 out of 10.
My life isn't as glamorous as my wanted poster makes it look like.
Spider-Man's PlayStation exclusivity is a non-factor for me. His web swinging has absolutely no momentum and genuinely feels horrible. Especially when I used to bounce between this and Fortnite back when that had web shooters, and that felt great. Speaking of, points for being the only game where you have to manually load new web cartridges. That's pretty cool. His combat feels fine and looks great, but the web strike leaves a lot to be desired. His heroics are standard Spidey stuff, but the ultimate can give you web boxing gloves, so that's tight. 7 out of 10.
People are always asking me if I'm a morning person or a night person. And I'm just like, buddy, I'm barely even a person.
Yeah, Bucky's animations are mostly recycled from Steve, but they changed the context and effects for some of them to make sense for Bucky. For example, this move where Steve throws his shield at the ground now becomes a grenade for Bucky. His heroics are pretty good. Not a fan of the invisibility, but it makes sense. The airstrike is great, as is the super knife mode. I really like Bucky's gun, as all of its modes serve a different tactical purpose, and all feel pretty useful. I like the way it was designed, given the budgetary restrictions. 8 out of 10.
Everyone, synchronize your watches.
I don't know how to do that.
I don't wear a watch.
Ha! Time is a construct.
Okay, let's address the overly expensive elephant in the room. This game's biggest point of contention is the microtransactions. Avengers certainly isn't the only AAA game using microtransactions for cosmetics, but man, it's getting judged the harshest for what it is. Now keep in mind, I'm not trying to defend the microtransactions, merely make the case that they're not as terrible as everyone makes them out to be. At launch, the game's cosmetics kinda sucked. Primarily just a single good costume and then about 10 million awful recolors of that costume. And while most of those were ones you can earn in the game itself, a good amount of them were from the marketplace. Now, most of those aren't available for a singular purchase. I'll use this Hulk skin as an example. So you can buy the default Gladiator Hulk skin on its own, but for the recolors, you'll have to buy a package with all of them. So the individual character pages don't look as cluttered with stupid recolors. Since launch, they've put a pretty heavy emphasis on introducing unique comic looks like Hooded Black Widow, a proper classic Hawkeye, and even Werewolf Captain America. They've also introduced a bunch of MCU costumes, so much that you can have every character currently in the game rocking an MCU look. And while some of their earlier attempts didn't look great due to strict adherence to pre-existing hairstyles, they've taken the feedback and started incorporating hairstyles that are more appropriate for certain skins, even introducing completely new hairstyles for certain ones. I do think the skins are mostly overpriced, but there's almost always a sale going on, so it's mostly just a waiting game. If you want a certain Hawkeye costume, just be patient, it'll end up on sale within a couple months. Here's how I think of the marketplace in this game at this point. It's a lot like Fortnite. Yes, this is the third time I'm mentioning Fortnite in this video, but just work with me here. The Fortnite item shop is constantly filled with unique skins, and almost everyone owns at least one. But you don't get them for a tactical advantage like that unless you're like my buddy Zach, who intentionally plays as female characters for a smaller hitbox. No, you get them because you like the game and you want to look cool in the game. That's where Avengers purchasable skins are at. If you like the game, you buy them. And if you don't like the game, like, why are you complaining? You shouldn't even be playing the game and spending money on it if you don't like it. Thus, you shouldn't have any stake in how people who do like it are choosing to spend 10 bucks. I will also say that I love the recent decision to include certain skins, both MCU and comic inspired, in the shipments. If you don't know, the game introduced a system of loot boxes that you can buy with the currency you have to earn in the game, which usually include upgrade materials, nameplates, emotes, and skins. If you buy 100 of them in a month, you can get a big special reward at the end. I think all these needs are a few more nameplates a month because I'm tired of buying the same shipments that don't give me anything because I have all the nameplates already and, it won't... Plus, I'm already maxed out on fragments, so I don't need any of those. They also need to balance the distribution of skins and emotes better because I can get through a full 100 shipments in a month without getting a single skin or emote. Oh, and while we're on things to add, don't completely cut support on Spidey stuff. There's still MCU costumes you can add, and plenty of comic suits you can add too. Off the top of my head, I would love to see what this game's versions of Superior Spider-Man, the Symbiote Suit, Spidey 2099, and Scarlet Spider would look like.
While I'm gone, Clint, you're in charge.
Yes!
T'Challa, you're secretly in charge.
Obviously.
Okay, time to answer the question. The title of this video, The Anatomy of an Addiction. I've spent most of this video ragging on Avengers. Hell, I've honestly been a little harsher to it than I expected to be. And I wanted to go in free of bias to deliver what I considered a pretty even-handed criticism. So if I think this game's only decent, then why am I addicted? The truth is, I hoped I'd write this video and come to some profound conclusion. Partly for your sake, so I could have some grand insight to put in this section of the video and you could come away with some interesting take. Partly for my own sake, so I could make some sort of peace with this game. But the truth is, I don't know. Maybe it's a misplaced sense of hope, the idea that this game will become truly and wholly good eventually. After all, the state of the game on a technical and design level was insanely messy at launch, and a lot of the systems have been reworked and most of the bugs have been fixed. Honestly, I think the bug argument with this game is a cheap shot. Like, every live service game is glitchy at launch, that's just par for the course. Maybe I'm addicted because I don't have to think. Some of my other favorite games that I play regularly require thought, strategy, and attention, so maybe I just like Avengers because I can turn my brain off for a bit and mash square and look cool while doing it. But if I'm honest, I think it's a desire to be with these characters. Think about this for a second. The Avengers is the biggest franchise in the history of forever. The movies have made so much money, it hurts me to think about. The people working on these characters get checks with more zeros than I'll ever see in my lifetime. And this game is the only real way I can interact with them for the time being. Because I don't own a Switch and don't want to get one so I can play Ultimate Alliance 3. Obviously, if I wanted more content with most of these guys, I could go play the original 2 Ultimate Alliance games. But I shouldn't have to play a 16-year-old game to play as most of these characters. Now, I know that Iron Man, Captain America, and Black Panther have games on the horizon, and Spider-Man has one of the most successful launch franchises in PlayStation history with just 2 games. And while I'm sure that those games will all do a good job of representing these characters individually, I'd like to spend some time with these guys together. You know, the only real modern experience with the Avengers assembled.
Why? Why did you give Kamala a knife?
I'm sorry, she said she felt unsafe.
Now I feel unsafe.
I'm sorry. Would you also like a knife?
So, what's the future of this game looking like? Well, we know according to the devs that there's more content on the way, including more Omega-level threats, as well as the long-awaited patrol mode. But I just want to talk about a couple of characters that I think the game could benefit from and why, as well as outline how some of their abilities could work. Some of this is based on leaks, but it's mostly just characters I personally want to see. Off the bat, we more or less know that we'll be seeing She-Hulk, War Machine, and Captain Marvel. She-Hulk and War Machine could obviously end up being clones of Hulk and Iron Man, but I don't think they need to be. They can both easily be as different from their originals as Kate is from Clint. Hell, if you really wanted to go the extra mile, take a page out of Armored Adventures book and make War Machine about the same size as the Hulkbuster. Sure, it'd make most of his MCU costumes impossible to adapt, but it's something. Captain Marvel is automatically an interesting character to adapt, but my fear is they won't commit to how much she can actually do. I think it'd be really cool to see Carol use her binary form as her ultimate. Honestly, I think transformative ultimates like Embiggen and Hulkbuster are some of the best concepts to play with. And also, I think they should introduce Carol as an endgame character. Avengers pun not intended. The way that the story seems to be going is that it'll end with the Kree assault on planet Earth, so it makes sense that Carol shows up for that, and probably not earlier. That way, you know, the last character drop can be a big deal because it'll be the end of the game properly. I think Ant-Man and the Wasp are kinda obvious since Hank is already in the game, as is the Pym particle status effect. And we've seen with Hulk, Spider-Man, and Black Panther that status effects can be tied to thematically appropriate characters, with each having an attack based around gamma, webs, and vibranium respectively. So give Scott a shrink ray and introduce a growth particle effect. Maybe it makes enemies bigger but much slower so they become easy targets. And you could even introduce the Microverse as a new location with insane new enemy types. I think Wasp is tricky for a few reasons. First, because she could either be Janet, Hope, or Nadia, and all of them don't work for different reasons. But gameplay-wise, I think Wasp is also a little difficult. Yeah, she can fly and shrink and shoot little energy blasts, but I'm having a hard time thinking of heroic attacks for her. Characters like Scarlet Witch, the Vision, and Doctor Strange all feel really obvious, and I think Wanda and Steven could have very interesting moves and effects given how insane their powers and abilities are. Though I would like to see Wanda paired with Pietro rather than Vision. Like, obviously you can have all three, but my fear is that they will just completely omit Quicksilver because the movies decided to. I don't have anything too wild to say about Falcon, except that I think it'd be a disservice if we didn't get both comic and movie versions of his Captain America suit with the shield on the back. There are also some rumors that some non-MCU characters are planned at some point, like Quake, Spider-Woman, Mockingbird, and Mar-Vell. And yes, I know 3 out of those 4 are in the MCU in some way or another, but you get my point. They're not main players, and I think it would be a lot of fans' first real exposure to them, and I think that would be pretty awesome. I'd also love to see more bosses from the comics. I don't think Thanos would fit here, but Loki was already teasing the side missions. Give me a boss fight against multiple Ultrons, similar to the Cosmic Cube Monica fight. Give me a boss gauntlet against the Masters of Evil. Give me a Shadow of the Colossus style fight against a Kree Sentry. You can do a lot with these characters fighting their best villains from the comics, and I'd love to see that potential fulfilled. But unfortunately, I don't see a lot of these coming to pass. See, everything I mentioned in this section, aside from the bosses, pulled from a 2021 article covering the confirmed and unconfirmed future of Marvel's Avengers. However, we're not in 2021 anymore, and in May of 2022, Square Enix sold several studios, including Crystal Dynamics and Eidos Montreal, to Embracer Group for $300 million. If either of those studios sounds familiar, they're the developers on Avengers and Guardians of the Galaxy respectively, as well as games like Tomb Raider and Deus Ex. Square Enix has since started making new copies of these games harder to buy, and the chance of us seeing a sequel for Guardians becomes slimmer by the minute. And as for Avengers, well, it's no secret that the game's content hasn't been considered too revolutionary, impactful, or frequent since War for Wakanda was released back in August of 2021. A lot of fans, myself included, speculate that Bucky could very well be the last hero and that the game is trying to squeeze every last dollar it can with new comic and movie-inspired outfits until the game loses support due to the Embracer Group acquisition. The game that could have been Marvel's destiny, and I mean that in a positive way, will likely fizzle out 2 years after it launched, and that sucks. But I would love to be proven wrong.
Why is the Hulk so sad?
He took one of those "Which Avenger are you?" quizzes.
And?
God, Bugman.
Hey! So what can Marvel's Avengers become? A failed game based on Earth's mightiest franchise? A game on the precipice of death due to corporate politics? A lesson in game development that money spent on cosmetics will be earned in the hearts of players if the gameplay is engaging enough? But also, a game with a very vocal and passionate community and fan base. A game that shows a lot of love of its main characters. A game brimming with the potential to become one of the best comeback stories in gaming on the level of Battlefront 2. It lies somewhere in the middle, and that's why I'm kind of sad that it might not continue. To paraphrase Alex Mercer, what will this game become? Something less than great, but also something more. The components are there, the ideas, the potential, and a team of devs who clearly want this game to be the best that it can be. All the pieces are there. They just need to be assembled.
Thank you for watching Marvel's Avengers: The Anatomy of an Addiction.
And remember, with the great power of liking, commenting, and subscribing to Chimera Films, there must also come the great responsibility to support the voice actors using the links below. Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to go ask She-Hulk to fight editorial for me.
Special thanks to my buddy Omar for donating to the $10 tier on my Patreon. If you want to help support the channel and get exclusive benefits, then go assemble over on my Patreon for as little as $3 a month because it really helps me out. So yeah, and a special thanks to all the voice actors. I know I already got Spider-Man to say it, but special thanks to all the voice actors who came out for this video because everyone did a really great job, and I'm really happy with how this video came out. Also, if I'm releasing this on the day that I intended it to, it's my birthday. So if somehow you're an insane person and you watch this far, wish me a happy birthday. And I'll see you guys later. Peace.
While I'm gone, Clint, you're in charge.
Yes! It's about time. You know, one of these days they're going to look at somebody with a stick, and sure, they're going to think, man, that guy's a freaking moron. But you know what? It's about time. It's about time that they finally recognized, you know what? Maybe he's onto something. You know, they said that right when humanity was first starting to hunt. You know, it was back in the Paleolithic era. I had to look that up. Paleolithic. You know, you pal around with the Avengers some, you know. What do they got? They got armor, magic, shrink rays, magic. So believe me, when I tell you it is good to be in charge, it could get a lot worse.